So we're going to change gears again now, and we're going to zoom out from remanufacturing and factories and products and engines, and we're going to look at the wider economy. And to tee us up is Kate Raworth talking about her vision for a different type of economy at the previous diff.
I think there are two design principles we need to put at the heart of the 21st century economy. The first one is to be regenerative by design. And I think that's where my work really closely fits together with the work of the MacArthur Foundation, because it's about creating a circular or cyclical economy in which resources are used and never used up. But the second one is to be distributive by design and to ensure that value created is shared far more equitably than it is currently. And for me, the key thing is that these go together. I don't think we can have a regenerative circular economy that is not distributive by design. There's a danger we head towards circular elitism. So I bought my hose pipes to tell this story. So look, here's the linear, degenerative 20th century economy in which we stuff resources into the end, we take those resources, we make them into stuff we want, we use it for a while, we throw it away. This is the cutting against the cycles of the living world. So what does a business that does this needs to do to be part of the circular economy? Close the loop, create a closed loop system. You know, here you are, you hold that. So there you go, you need to hold it in the middle. There we go. So, you know, we sell you our products, please send them back and we'll refurbish them and sell them again, right? We've got a closed loop economy. Okay, let's say that's one clothing company. And there's another clothing company. Say, oh, we're making, you know, our clothes as well. We want to be part of the circular economy, so we're going to close our loop. No, hold it. No, no, no. You have to keep that. No, you're not finished, mate. So, right, there we go. Now we've got the beginnings of the circular economy. Okay? Now imagine if every company in the world was doing this. Say, send us the things back and we'll recycle it. And we had these individual closed loops. You see, it's cute. You look cute, Joss. But
thank you very much.
Nature would never do this. Nature would laugh at us. Okay, pop those down. That is not going to get us to a circular economy. Nature doesn't turn a daffodil into a daffodil or a robin into a robin. Nature does this. Okay. So this, I believe, is the ecosystem approach to a circular economy in which all companies are deeply interconnected in a web of material reuse.
That was Kate Raworth speaking at the diff about her vision for a different type of economy inspired by nature. And when we think about the economy today, if you want to find out how the economy is doing, you look at economic growth, don't you? You look at GDP, is it growing by 0.1% today, 0.2%? But our next speaker says that the ways that we typically measure the health of the economy isn't delivering the outcomes that we really need. So if we could have different ways to measure what we want from the economy, then we could maybe help steer it in the right direction. I'm joined by Catherine Trebek, Policy and Knowledge Lead at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. Welcome to the diff.
Thanks, Joe. Great to be here.
So we just heard from Kate. She's obviously a leading thinker in questioning whether the way that we perceive, the way we measure the economy is fit for the future or is even fit for right now.
Yep. And a We All ambassador. Very, very proud to have Kate on our side.
Ambassador and friend. You agree with Kate, seeing as she's an ambassador of We All. So you also don't think the economy, the way that we measure the economy, is fit for the future?
No, we've got an economy that's so fundamentally misaligned in terms of how we measure its success to what people and planet really, really need. We've got an economy that's set up and geared up in a way that's not fit for delivering the sorts of lives and the environmental regeneration that our current daily lives currently need. And if I can just click onto the slides, go back to one. I mean, everyone could pull out their favourite indication that we have progressed massively in the last few centuries, the last few decades. People would point to how we've eradicated certain diseases, gender equality is getting better, literacy rates are going up, young kids are surviving through childhood, life expectancy is going up. We could all look at that and think there has been undeniable progress. And so often that occurs when the benefits of growth are used and directed to addressing poverty, and they're channeled into the sort of public institutions that make life better for people, whether it's education systems and public health systems. But we're now at a point where we have to look at what's going on around the world and ask this big question: are those fruits of growth beginning to rot. And we see that with the extent of environmental breakdown, that the fruits of growth are really dangerous in terms of how we're putting pressure on the planet, heating up the planet in terms of eradicating biodiversity. So across a wide range of environmental indicators, there's some serious alarm bells ringing.
Well, if I could just jump in there. So you mentioned that a lot of people might think, well, the economy's kind of working fine. We've got the fruits of kind of prosperity. Obviously, that isn't the case for everyone. There'll be many people out there here in London, around the UK, around the world, who say, well, the economy isn't really working the way that they feel it should. But I would imagine that their reaction is, can we fix it for me? Not can we fix it for biodiversity or climate change? Can you make sure that I've got everything that I need? A roof over my head, meal on the table. So
I think people are starting to realise how deeply connected those two stories are, because so often, whether it's here in the UK or whether it's around the world, we see that it's the people who are struggling the most in an economic sense in the current system who are also those who are going to be hit hardest by the impact of environmental breakdown. And whether it's low-lying communities in island states in the Pacific, or whether it's communities just up the road here in London who cannot afford flood insurance, or who is experiencing the water out of their tap is not fit to drink. It's the poorest communities, time and time again, who get hit hardest. And so the confluence between the environmental crisis and the economic and social crisis means that we have to address those two together. And we often talk about that the fruits of growth are becoming dangerous in an environmental sense, but it's also desperately unevenly shared harvest in the extent to which there's global inequality, but also within cities, within the country, like the UK, we see the wealth and the fruits of the growth being siphoned off to those who have already got a lot, and the rest of us, living standards, wages stagnating, and for some people even life expectancy going down. So we've got to ask some pretty massive questions about this recipe that we've used in the past. Is it fit for the future? Do we need to actually really redesign the economy? And we've been started to look at how much money and resources and political effort goes into coping with the fallout of this current system. And there's a term we use. It comes from social policy and sort of marketing and manufacturing. This idea of failure demand. That demand on services is driven by our failure to create good lives for people. I mean, this example is a good one, the spending on the face mask because our streets are polluted. But it's a bit like an onion. There are layers and layers to this, whether it's spending on some of the accident and emergency of treating people on Friday night because they've drunk themselves into oblivion, or whether it's some of the criminal justice system, or whether it's pressure that's being put on the NHS because of loneliness or people self-harming. And also in an environmental sense, ecological economists would talk of defensive expenditures, and whether that's cleaning up after an oil spill or rebuilding people's homes after they've been flooded. All those sorts of aspects show that just how much of our current economic resources go into coping with the failure. We're sort of trying to fix and heal and treat and just try to cope with and patch up, like that sort of sticking plaster seems that that's the best we can cope with. And that's why at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, we're really saying it's time to ask much harder questions and raise our gaze to, can we do things better the first time around? That's what we're about.
And presumably, so if I can try and summarise that, you're saying you're trying to fix those problems before they start, so improving people's lives so that they don't have to rely so much on the kind of safety nets of society, keep them healthy rather than treat them when they're sick.
Absolutely, and I often talk about it as getting the economy itself to do more of the heavy lifting, saying we want more out of the economy in terms of fair distribution of resources, in terms of ensuring that people have enough to get by so they're not having to turn to the state to top up their poverty wages or top up their housing benefit, or we're not constantly having to invest our collective resources in cleaning up after the sort of oil spills and so on. And so really say, if we redesign the economy in a way that shares things better first time around, so that we don't have huge gaps in income and wealth disparities, and we're not just trying to close that gap and a little bit of redistribution, but actually we have an economy that from the word go it distributes things much more fairly. And there's lots of nice examples of that. And the word that I keep coming back to is, and it's a rather ugly term, but it's really useful, is predistribution. Can we have the economy pre-distribute things in a way, rather than just waiting till 5 o'clock in the afternoon and then turning our eyes on government and saying, right, can you fix this and redistribute things because the economy has run rampant?
It feels like that is the crux of it. So we hear almost every week that the new records are being broken for the amount of cash that's been hoarded by a smaller and smaller percentage of the global population. They're not really investing it. It's not being spent on infrastructure. It's squirreled away in someone's bank.
And driving food price spikes, for example.
So is that's if you could wave a magic wand and or you had one wish, that would be the one, surely.
I don't know. I shy away from that. There's one easy solution. I think if the sooner we understand that this is about a jigsaw of solutions, and certainly turning our attention to how the financial system operates, which is the plumbing of the economy, where investment goes. That's a key part of that jigsaw. How we redesign businesses so that they are owned by workers or owned by communities, so they're not geared up in a way to increase returns to shareholders who, let's face it, shareholders usually are lucky enough to already have a bit of money. And so every pound that's extracted to them is a pound that's not going to a worker, or it's not going to a local community, or it's not being invested in environmental protection. So that's part of the question. So looking at how do we repurpose and redesign businesses. But it's how do we do infrastructure? It's how do we price things? What do we tax and subsidise? So the silver bullet, tempting though it is, I think will take us to too narrow a focus when actually this is a question about complex system change.
I'm going to take a question that I usually would save them for a bit more of our discussion first, but I think it's an important one from Jess, who said, how much of a challenge is that, let me rephrase that, it's about the word economy. Jess says it's a bit of a black box. A lot of people don't know what it means. How much of a challenge is that?
No, it's a really good question, Jess. Thank you. I mean, the economy is everywhere. It's how we get our wages. It's often when we're spending, food and so on. But it's also outside the formal marketplace. It's how we care for each other. It's a gift economy. It's everywhere. And in a way, though, people have become masked because it's been dressed up in these fancy, complicated economic indicators. And when people talk about the economy, they think about just the marketized economy, things like GDP or profits or house prices and so on. The way I get my head around understanding the importance of the economy is thinking about, if you and I were wanting to walk across a stream, the goal for us is to walk across the stream. Now we'd need sort of little stones to put our feet on. That's the economy. It's not the end in itself, but it's a fundamental part of getting to the ultimate end. And so we need enough of those stones, so we need enough resources to be shared equally. They can't be slippery or wobbly. We won't have a chance of getting across to the other side. But the key thing is that so often the economy has become the end in itself. We've misconstrued ends and means. And I think that means we've got a whole lot of policy choices that have been skewed towards growing the economy as measured by GDP, rather than saying, what is it that really, really matters to us? It's getting to the other side of the stream. It's good lives for people having enough time in their community, people feeling safe and secure, people feeling a sense of purpose. That's the ultimate goal. And the problem is we've with this economics, the way it's currently understood, has taken our gaze away from that.
So the changes that you're talking about there's almost nothing that's more profound than some of these shifts. Yeah. What does Wellbeing Economy Alliance do to try and where do you actually get started?
Well, we start because there's a lot of amazing work. Click this through. Maybe just click it through. So the Wellbeing Economy Alliance is about recognising that at so many of the root causes of so many of the challenges facing our world, we come back to how the economy is designed, how it prices, what it incentivises, do people have enough resources. So we've got our gaze firmly on changing how the economy operates. And we understand how we're going to have a fighting chance of transforming that, as epitomised by this rather lovely tree. It's going to be fed by bringing together all the knowledge that's already out there about why things are wrong, how things can be done differently, whether that's in practice or in academic literature, so bringing that knowledge together. Another key route to that is changing our imaginations about a better economy, that it can be done, that it's feasible, that it's desirable, and that's the stories and the narratives. And they feed this idea of a power base. That's about thematic clusters, working with businesses, working with finance groups. It's also power base around citizens. So we've just launched something, it's an amazing platform called We All Citizens. And we're working also with local hubs. So there's We All Scotland, there's We All Canada emerging, We All Costa Rica. So there's lots of ways of feeding that power base, and that ultimately will lead to system change. And I actually love a different way of looking at this. In a sense, this is really our theory of change, this idea that if we work together with all these amazing diverse groups out there who are already rolling up their sleeves and trying to transform the economy, and you've probably had all sorts of different speakers throughout the diff who are doing this, our sense is that there's great work happening. If we can work together, then we can do extraordinary things. And that's what the Wellbeing Economy Alliance is really about.
And you mentioned a few geographic hotspots. We've got to talk about New Zealand. So
Yes.
people might have heard that New Zealand now have a wellbeing budget.
Mm-hmm. Yep, just brought down last month.
You'll be able to explain it much better than me. What's happened?
So what New Zealand has done is they've said, we have to shift the way our budget operates. They've said, we've got 5 goals. They're things like a digital economy, a low carbon economy, supporting Maori cultures, attending to child poverty and mental health. And all government departments, so that the head of the police service, I imagine, the head of the roads department, even the head of defence, all those government departments, when they're putting in their bids for government resources, they have to speak to those goals. So they're really starting to bend the spend, if you like, according to these dimensions of what really matters to life of New Zealanders. And it comes from a recognition that New Zealand's gross domestic product, which is the usual way that we look at the health of the economy, and it's actually the proxy for how we understand how good a nation is. We've been so attuned to thinking if your GDP is big, then you're a developed country, congratulations. New Zealand ticks all those boxes. But in another sense, they've got huge levels of youth suicide, mental health crisis, homelessness, the environmental footprint is too high. And so they've said, well, let's not just look at those fairly orthodox economic indicators. Let's turn our attention to what really is making such a difference for Kiwis. And let's use the budget to change that. I once heard this beautiful phrase that budgets are moral statements with numbers attached. And I think what Jacinda Ardern and her Finance Minister Grant Robertson are doing is taking that challenge and saying, well, can we redesign the budget? So it's going to be really exciting to watch how that experiment plans out.
The political opposition, so take it with a pinch of salt, their criticism was that this is a marketing exercise, this is savvy branding, because this is what governments do. They figure out what the needs of society are and where they're falling short, and that's where they spend money.
Well, and actually, to give credit to the opposition, what the Wellbeing budget that's just come out now is based on is something that was developed under the previous government, which is the Living Standards Framework in the New Zealand Treasury. So they've actually got a hand in it. So it's a shame they're dismissing it. And to a degree, there's something in that. I mean, governments, they will protect national parks, increase living wages. They will take decisions that support other goals. The challenge is that GDP as a measure of progress is so ubiquitous and it constrains our thinking. Even if you think about how we define a crisis, an economic crisis, it's incremental declines in GDP. I mean, we should be thinking about an economic crisis as when numbers of people are going up, turning to food banks, when people are feeling their financial situation is insecure and precarious, when people's paychecks does not help them lift them above the breadline. That is a financial crisis. And yet, in GDP terms, it's only when GDP comes down. And what GDP does, it narrows our gaze, it incentivizes that sort of sticking plaster downstream attention that we were talking about earlier. It doesn't incentivize prevention, the sort of getting that right the first time around.
Presumably we're still a long way off well-being being valued above GDP, though.
We're getting there. I mean, this is one of my hopeful days because I'm here with you on a Friday and we're having good conversation. But there are moves getting there, and I think what's changed in the last few years is that there's a really quite broad-based understanding that GDP is a pretty flawed measure of progress. And feminist economists have been saying this for decades, ecological economists have been saying this for decades, and finally that conversation is going mainstream. People really get it now. It's not if we need to replace and go beyond GDP, it's the how. We're now at that next frontier.
One of the good things about GDP is that it's measurable. Arguably, is something that can be summed up in one number. Is well-being measurable?
Yes, yeah. I mean,
How are people doing it?
Yes, I mean, well, it's sort of, there's a broad-based understanding of well-being. Some people would suggest you can just ask people how happy are they feeling, how content are they. I'd say that's one important component, but it's not enough. I think we should be looking at people's quality of jobs, their sense of meaning and purpose, as a green space around them, their distribution of income. There's a whole lot of figures that actually are probably already measured by the Office of National Statistics. The challenge is they're not on the in tray of the finance minister when he or she gets to work on a Monday morning. They're not the top of the lips of the Radio 4 news presenter the day after the Chancellor brings down a budget. Wouldn't it be brilliant if after a budget we had John Humphreys on Radio 4 saying to the Chancellor, what's this going to do for levels of loneliness? What's this going to do for numbers of people turning to food banks? And I have this dream that one day what we'll measure instead of GDP will be the number of girls who ride their bikes to school. Because imagine if that number is going up, we know that they're getting their breakfast, the streets are safe, there's schools nearby, parents can afford bicycles. So there's lots of figures that are out there. It's just how we use them and how we report on them and how we hold policymakers and politicians accountable and businesses accountable to those more richer measures that are better aligned with what really matters to people.
Catherine, thank you very much for joining us here in the DIF studio. That's all we've got time for here today at the DIF. There is one more session coming up, but that's all from me, from Catherine and David for now. Keep the conversation going using #ThinkDiff, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.